Welcome to week 6, the final lecture in the Facebook Marketing George Brown College series. Next week are presentations from you, the student, so you will be the leader of our lecture material. But this week we're going to really dive into just a whole bunch of case studies and really look at all kinds of different content examples and talk a bit about strategy and likes and engagement so that we can feel like we really have a good handle on Facebook as a platform now that we've been exploring this for the past 6 weeks. So one piece that we started to touch on last week and we're going to evolve this week is this idea of crisis management, and when your role as an administrator of a Facebook page is to manage negative responses. And the fact is that because Facebook is still the largest social network and certainly still leading in the place that we go to reach out to brands, it means that when we have a negative experience, it's also the place we're going to go and shout that out. So as brand administrators, especially in the B2C or business to consumer world, we need to be super aware of that and look at some examples of crisis management and community support response. So if we look at one example here, let's start with CookSource. So this is now an older example, but certainly still completely relevant. This is what happened was, and this is a blurry photo, so let me back up here so we can see it. So CookSource was an online magazine that was accused of ripping off recipes and basically taking recipes and republishing them without credit. So one of the recipe authors reached out, sent an email, basically said, this isn't cool with me. You need to at least assign credit. And what was interesting was the response from CookSource directly that basically said, you should be happy that we took your recipe. You should be happy we're helping to elevate and amplify it. And while the author had suggested that maybe the person should be compensated, the original author should be compensated if they were going to use the recipe to sell magazines, this person replies with, I have a difficult time with your request for monetary gain. We put some time into rewriting of your article. You should compensate me. I never charge young writers for advice or poorly written pieces. It just basically goes on as this like terrible, we're not sorry, and we're absolutely not going to respect your wishes to have money dedicated to the university or money contributed to the university in which this author studied as sort of the request for publishing the article without permission. So in response to this ridiculous article, Monica publishes it up online and the Facebook page gets slammed, completely slammed, with the whole sort of internet community getting behind and looking at all of the other articles online where CookSource had ripped it off, and they just started publishing them over and over and over again onto their page of all of the places where CookSource was stealing content, and the magazine eventually folded. So it's absolutely a very serious thing, and when you respond publicly and negatively to an online community, that community can come together and join and react. And it's sort of funny, but also a bit ridiculous. Let's look at some other examples that are sometimes more serious. So when breaking news happens, we see here when there was the news around Penn State and the molestation charges, there were people writing on the University of Penn State's Facebook page all kinds of different messages of shock and outpouring and just sort of reacting to the breaking news. And what we saw from Penn State was it looked like in some cases there was some deleting of comments. There was some sort of hiding, or basically they were managing what people were writing on the page, and people were noticing that those comments were getting deleted. Now, whether or not they were offensive or derogatory in nature is probably the primary reason why Penn State was deleting it, but it was making the online community more and more angry because they felt like their outpouring and sharing of stories was being filtered by Penn State, and because the whole story had to do with administration potentially covering up these child molestation charges, it just sort of added to the fury from the public audience and reinforced why deleting comments on Facebook, even if they're offensive, is almost never, basically never advised, because who cares if somebody else writes something negative on your Facebook wall? We all understand that it's not the brand's responsibility to take that down, and that that's somebody else's opinion. We understand that this is a world of co-created content where multiple people are contributing online, and so deleting just makes it look like censorship and creates much more anger with an online community. What I thought was interesting is when we're talking about EdgeRank and the ways that we're trying to engage with our community and make sure that all of the updates are seen. I saw George Takei had published one of these basically like requests to ask people to go to his Facebook page and request all updates so that they wouldn't be filtered. 35,000 people liked this comment, and I thought it was really interesting the way he put the blame and framed the whole conversation around Facebook limiting content for you as a brand. So I want to show you all this content, but Facebook's going to limit it. So if you want to see this content, you need to go into all updates. Now we know that he doesn't mention EdgeRank here at all, but he's basically talking specifically to EdgeRank and how you can encourage your fans, especially if you get a huge spike at one time, to go onto the page, select to receive all updates so that they tell EdgeRank that this is an important brand from them. Thought it was sort of an interesting way to keep your community seeing your updates and your content. And so some people got upset with this as a request and didn't like that George Takei as a brand was telling people how to use their Facebook. But what was really interesting was he published that whole conversation in a really transparent way online and basically said, look, where I'll provide you with what Facebook's saying with regards to EdgeRank and decreasing organic reach, but I'm still going to ask that you follow this out. And he published the whole reply, which was so great. And really helped people to understand EdgeRank and what it means for users and the way they interact with their content. I thought overall this was a really good sort of conversation between Facebook and George Takei, or Facebook and a brand page, all happening really publicly within this space. So here's just a little note. If you're working for a big brand, so you might be in this class and learning Facebook so that you can make a job switch or that you can move into a social media role. Maybe your organization is not managing social media in any way now and you're sort of wishing they would get into this space. I would say you can always look internally for ways to engage with your community. Look at this example of Boeing that, almost 70,000 likes and 0 engagement. So they obviously grabbed the brand URL to make sure that they had the presence, but then zero presence, no brand cover, not even an about statement, not a website, not anything. So really what we do is we end up leaving users feeling lost because they're looking for this information. They might be looking to talk or tag or celebrate Boeing in their posts, and they're not able to because there's no presence. And in this days, it's the same as not having a website. It just simply feels unacceptable to not have something. Even you don't have to manage your Facebook community all the time, but regardless, if you're a public-facing brand, you've really got to address not allowing this sort of thing to happen. So in terms of managing crisis, managing the sort of negative elements of posts and when people kind of react and lash out or react in a way you're not happy with or your bosses aren't happy with on Facebook, a few advice to me. One is never to delete posts, but instead figure out what the way to respond will be. There's always one, even if it's just the views are your own. Remember, we talked about house rules last week. House rules are a great way to say what you will and will not engage with in terms of content. I really like that as an advice. You can always agree not to respond to insults or offensive comments, but otherwise overall engage. Really consider as part of your strategy who the voice of the organization is. Are you using I or we? Are you considering, when we talk about there's only one level of authenticity, replying quickly without thinking about it, sometimes you can run into these cook source-like examples that can be categorized under bad replies versus George Takei, who responded to the negative feedback around his request to change updates and was very transparent by copying and pasting emails in a really positive way and basically saying, I hear you and here's what how the conversation is unfolding, versus something like CookSource, which says, we're not sorry and you should be apologizing to us for wasting our time. So be very, very cautious with voice and what level of immediate replies you're going to take, especially when the online community is angry. Also, this whole idea of, well, as long as I say something, then we're responding and that's good enough. Well, let's look at this Nestle example for why that's not necessarily true. What we saw here was another example of the online community lashing out onto the Facebook page directly. So in this case, it was Nestle. What we were seeing was Greenpeace was encouraging people to write to Nestle, write on their wall, and ask them to stop some of their practices with regards to some of the ways that they produce chocolate and some of their palm oil practices. Greenpeace was encouraging people to change their Facebook photo icon in support of getting Nestle to change their practices and some of their production standards. But what was really interesting was Nestle comes out on their wall and says, we're going to delete any post where if you write on the wall and you've got an altered version of our logo, or you've got these sort of public speaking, public PSA type posts, and you put them on our wall, we're going to delete them because you don't have permission to use our photo, even though, it was completely open domain in this case, and Greenpeace was encouraging people to get the message out. Really, really, really silly response from Facebook. And the tone, look at the tone in some of the replies. We had this like, you have freedom of speech, you have freedom of speech and expression, but these are the rules we set, so you're going to follow them, and that's it. We can do whatever we want. We can delete whatever post we want. This whole, oh please, it's like we're censoring everything to allow like passive aggressive, like ridiculous posts. Here's another one where we see people just hitting the page again with, you've got to be kidding me. This tone is ridiculous. Deleting of posts is ridiculous. Nestle, you're making the situation far, far worse than any sort of activism campaign response should or might have been. And then we see this pretty sort of funny and sad response from Nestle at the bottom that said, this deleting of logos was one in a series of mistakes for which I would like to apologize, and for being rude. We've stopped deleting posts, and I've stopped being rude. And there's so much wrong with even that sort of humorous response. Who is I? Why are we calling out this idea of being rude? Why are we calling out this idea of deleting logos? The whole thing just screams of amateur community manager. Turns out it was an external PR company that was managing the page at the time, so it wasn't in-house at Nestle, and needless to say, probably not hired again. So here comes to the questions when you're talking about farming out some of this to a third party. Who's managing your public relations? What does the response and tone look like to angry questions? Remember that people like me always screenshot activities like this, even as far back as 4 years ago. So I keep them and I show them for my classes, and therefore you can't delete it once a mistake has been made. And what is the level of sensitivity to people's feelings? How can you really wear the hat of your users to think about how are they going to react to my response? How are they thinking? How are they feeling? What are they doing? And being empathetic. We're going to explore an empathy activity in a few minutes. So that you can really start to think, what is the appropriate response for the level of crisis that we're dealing, and have we matched our tone to that? I really liked Shel Holtz. I read a lot of Shel Holtz, one a very early adopter social media writer, and he has a whole bunch of different advice on how to respond to crises on Facebook. More than anything else, I love this line around Facebook being the de facto place for communal grief, anger, and emotions over public events. So as a brand, you need to know that, yes, we express our anger over Twitter, maybe over Instagram, but really it's still Facebook where we go to express outrage and to post when we're furious with brands. So brands need to understand that those conversations and explorations of anger and grief and shock are there. And we need to honor our community and those emotions and what happens and figure out how to respond, not ignore, not delete, and not be ridiculous with the types of responses that we might publish. Here's some more reading for you. I'll post it to the Blackboard page around 10 mistakes to avoid around this topic. Here's some other advice when we're talking about other mistakes we can make that are maybe a little not so drastic. Posting too frequently. We know that with EdgeRank, if you publish too often, you're going to increase the likelihood that your brand or that your users will silence you or shush you or ask you to not provide updates any longer. So it's really important that you think about how often. I like to say posting 3 to 5 times a week is more than enough to keep your engagement, your surprise, your element of new content fresh in the feed. So really focus on that. Breaking the guideline rules, so using ads in your cover photo, asking people to change their photos to enter a contest. My number one mistake that I see people make is ignoring insights. You have to be obsessed with that when your fans are online number. And also be aware that Facebook is shrinking our content, right? We have that sort of, if you write too many lines of text, you'll get that read more link. People aren't reading it. I really think we're moving so closely and so much towards image-based click-throughs and image-based content on Facebook that you should really be looking at tweet-like posts, short, sweet, lots of emotion, and then an image and a link, and not focus so much on text, especially really long, wordy text. You can look at Humans of New York for this. I find they often write a story that's too long and people don't read it, and it might start to affect your marketing and your organic reach over time. Let's look at some examples where we're talking about this 1 million mark, but also sometimes we get to it when we see 1,000. We're as community managers obsessed with this idea of celebrating our milestones. There's a funny one here that I'll post around from Craft, and this is an example of celebrating when Craft hit 1 million fans. And I'll just skip over so you can see as I skip through this video, and I'll post it so you can see. They individually thanked all 1 million fans that liked their page. They played every first name, last initial of everybody on Facebook as a way to, of course, drive engagement, but also to celebrate success. Super cheesy, maybe brand appropriate given it was Craft dinner. I also really like the idea of live events. I'm actually really, really interested in how brands use the Facebook Open Graph API to bring in people from their website where they sign in on Facebook. You'll see this on BuzzFeed and comments and lots of other sites. Really thinking about how can you encourage people to participate on Facebook in a live way. So I posted to our group around Lean In was doing a live Q&A on Facebook via an app, lunch hour. That was a great example. We saw here Febreze did the same sort of combination of a live event and the classic 1 million thank you, where they had a live person thanking everyone 1 million times and saying thank you 1 million times for liking their brand page. These stunts are, to me, a little bit silly because what is the true content of this? It's kind of like trying to get a viral video on YouTube going, where you sort of hope that people will be interested in seeing how long it takes to say thank you 1 million times so they engage with it. But will they come back to Febreze the brand after? I'm not sure. Here's another example where we saw it from Tide, but here's a post that was really interesting. So yes, of course, even Tide thanks their fans. They used it in the cover photo. But look at some compelling content here where we have Happy Father's Day, a seasonal post. We've talked about seasonal content tied into Tide, thanking Father's Day, and then this clever pun around thanks for sharing the load. And then, of course, inevitably, somebody writes on the wall just like anything else, and we have somebody who's responding with a support question, right? That I love Tide, but I'm not able to use it on my 3-month-old baby. The pods work great, but it doesn't work on the delicate cycle. Coupons, more coupons, please. We have somebody else talking. And then somebody else answers the question, right? Try it on only cold water. And then we see this other post from somebody who's quite negative and says people will figure out over time what you're doing is poison. And then what we see from Tide is they respond specifically to Erin with this weird support that basically says, no, Tide will work for the entire family. And they ignore Christina, who helped Erin, and this other post around poison. But since we can see from the timing that all those posts were there when they chose to respond, it feels really strange. It feels like selective responding. It feels like not really answering the question and definitely not listening to their community. So instead, what we need to say is like, thanks all for your feedback. Thanks for contributing. We're always listening. Special shout out to Christina for helping Erin. We love the way people are working together or something. I would have thought that would be a way better response than this really PR focused, you can use Tide for your entire family, and then ignoring both Hazen and Christina in their reply. So you're responsible for building a 2-page executive summary and Facebook strategy as part of the finale for this course and your major assignment that takes up a chunk of your marks. I would definitely encourage you to remember this phrase that a like button and the number of likes you have are those vanity metrics. They're tactics to grow your brand. They are not the strategy. The strategy is how do you avoid this type of disconnected conversation with your users, and instead, how do you build something that actually celebrates all of the people who are on your page because they want to hear from you on Facebook? You can look here too, thinking about still we're seeing separations of event-based pages versus one large organizational page. So you can see RBC here set up a page for the next Great Innovator Challenge, and they had, in that case, 625 fans or so that liked this specific page versus, at the time, 28,000 fans on their overall Facebook page. What are you going to do with those 625 people that liked this one random event for this one random time in 2011 that's so far gone now? Instead, you need to drive everybody to the main page and not try to microsite it off. It doesn't work at these cases in the sense for brands anymore. A more recent example is to think about how Facebook could actually start to potentially act as your website, truly, or drive traffic to your website as well. So think about how people might be searching Facebook and they'll find your content. And that means you need to think about search engine optimization and the use of keywords in each one of your posts. So what I thought was interesting is if you look at Visa Prepaid here, especially during the this is the winter season, sort of after our New Year's resolution theme or seasonal type when Visa might be posting. You'll notice here they're using words like checks, automatic deposits, direct deposits, New Year's resolution, Visa Prepaid. These are all terms that people might Google. And by using all of those search terms on Facebook, it's likely that their Facebook page and all these current posts will come up in the top 10 search results. Maybe, especially Visa Prepaid can't keep this content up to date on their actual website. Facebook can become a place where you can drive people to specific campaigns. So really think about how will people be searching for my brand and how can I use my keywords to drive people to Facebook first from Google specifically. Also, that's when the pages to watch becomes really helpful for your insights because you can look at the competition and how they're using keywords and keep messing around with keywords in photo captions, in your status updates, in your about to see if it changes and helps to increase growth for your overall page. I find that headlines are particularly effective for search engine optimization. This is a quote from Majestic Media that said, search engines index important headline data. Often, Facebook is a trusted site of Google. Being a trusted site means that Facebook results will often rank higher than those of untrusted sites. So your use of strong keywords for how people will find you is epically important for the way that you craft your status updates on Facebook. Thinking about applications, I know if we go way back now to week 3, so far back, and think about, do we want a page tab, a custom application that really does, the Amex type events with e-commerce and video embedded in forums? In a lot of cases, the question is whether or not that should be outsourced. I thought this quote, so Majestic Media is a Toronto-based agency that specializes just in Facebook applications. They have a brilliant quote that said the developer platform is kind of like the devil you don't want to get to know as a technical lead because it's always changing. And what else is great is the quote around like applications primarily need to be simple, tell users exactly what to do, and the steps must be for every application. Start the app, submit your action, and then share it on your page. If you were thinking about outsourcing to a third party, here's some of the questions that you should answer in your strategy and have ready to go before you start. Ask the questions around who maintains this content when the contract ends, or is this app going to just die? Imagine you had a roll up the rim ad on your Facebook page, and then you hire for like a one-time development shop, and then they leave. What do you do next year? Can you run the same app again? Do you need to update it? What does that look like? How much budget is there for maintenance as well as the initial build? Who can post content to the app? That's a classic developer question you should ask, just the same way you would from web development. How do we get content posted? How will we handle when Facebook changes? And be sure you look at the examples of apps from this development house and understand if those apps are high quality or if they're buggy or they're not intuitive or they're not gorgeous, then don't hire that agency. And the apps can be quite dynamic. We've seen lots of examples of this. You can have fully embedded websites that live right within the page itself. I also think about if you're strapped for budget or you think about ways to build your page out and engagement, partnerships are so key. Here's a great example of Get Volunteering, which is an initiative from Volunteer Canada, and it was a smaller page. But what they did was they partnered with Manulife Financial in lots of different ways, but also they ran a Facebook campaign that was specifically partnered. So this is the Get Volunteering page, but we have so much integration with Manulife Financial here, right? Also, don't you just love the cover photo, the way it's drawing that action to the app? And on the page tab, they use the sort of a border to highlight that one specific page tab to encourage people to click on it if they hit the page. I thought the design of this integration between a third-party corporate partner and a nonprofit was really, really slick and well done overall. And this is all on the nonprofit side, not the Manulife side. Thinking a little bit, just a note on bilingual community management. The question is, do you maintain, if you're a national organization or you're based in Quebec or actually based anywhere for that matter, do you maintain French and English on the same page, or do you have separate French and English pages for both users? This is a question I can't answer directly for you, but I would encourage you to really reflect and think about, are all of your users bilingual, or are they primarily Francophone or primarily Anglophone? Because if they are, it might change whether or not you need to manage two separate pages. There's also, understand that you can't just simply translate a post from English directly into French. Definitely don't use Google Translate. As far as French language goes, I've noticed on Facebook slang doesn't work. However, you can be a little bit cheeky, whereas in English that doesn't fly, especially for nonprofits. Bilingual posting does not mean posting the same content once in French and once in English. It's separate content for both, and then engaging with those two communities separately. It could be on the same page, but they could be separate pages as well. Here's an example of the content on both pages, and I find every time I look through this Montreal Fringe Festival page, I find it to be a bit jarring that we have posts from both languages, and sometimes I wish, maybe it was separated, because you do notice the copy and paste of both, which just makes the feed really full overall. Versus this page, this Montreal travel site, which focuses more on English specifically, and then they have another French engagement. Okay, activity. So this is an activity map, an empathy map, and this is an activity that you can do just on a Post-it note or a scrap piece of paper. And it's published by D-School under Creative Commons, this idea of it's a design thinking activity to get you to really wear the hat of your user. So if you say your user is in the center of the page, all you need to do is sort of just draw a quadrant and then write out, what is my user thinking? What are they seeing? What are they saying? What are they hearing? What are some of their pains and what are some of their gains? So if we take, for example, let's take George Brown continuing education students at the end of their course as an example. If George Brown College in continuing education wanted to build out their Facebook brand page, what would be smart content to publish at the end of the semester around April, beginning of May? A lot of people say, oh, it makes sense to publish, the new courses for May. Well, maybe, but if our primary users have a whole bunch of things they're thinking about, and you yourself are the user, so think, what are you thinking and feeling right now? You're overwhelmed by the end of the course, you're concerned about your marks, you're wondering about what's next to do. What are you seeing? Are you seeing advice for how to connect with your instructor? Are you seeing the information you need? Are you seeing other universities or other colleges who are posting information? What are you saying out loud? Are you communicating via Twitter or other platforms that you're frustrated or you're happy? And then what are you hearing from the brands? What are you hearing from other people? Are you hearing that there might be a new course opportunity? Are you hearing that there's job postings? And are you feeling overall frustrated or do you see opportunities? When, as a brand, you walk through an individual case study of a user, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? Take the Food 52 example we used from a few weeks ago. So the food, and I asked you, who's the audience? And some of you said they're novice cooks. All right. What is a novice cook thinking and feeling when they hit the Facebook page? What's going on in their world right now? They're thinking about new menus, the season's changing, there might be new grocery items. What are they seeing on the page? Does it match what they're thinking and feeling? What are they saying? How are they posting? How are they engaging? What are they hearing from others? When you start to answer all 4 of these quadrants, you've built your Facebook content for the short term and the long term. It's not more complicated than that. Walk through an activity, put the hat of your user on, not what the brand wants. Who is my user? What do they think? What are they seeing? What are they saying? What are they hearing in their whole life and also in their online Facebook life? When you can answer those questions, what will emerge is exactly what you should be posting to Facebook. Oh, they're probably thinking about easy meals that can be done in the weeknight because it's a busy time of year and everybody's feeling overwhelmed. Then that's exactly the content that you should be publishing online. And forget about other stuff. Forget about your long-term strategies. Forget about your push for your call to action, your drive for sales, all of your self-interested goals. Publish what you know your audience wants on Facebook and you will see the response overwhelmingly. So carry out an empathy map. Do it for yourself on a scrap piece of paper. I would love to hear you talk about this in Blackboard. Walk through the idea of what your users are thinking and feeling and saying and doing and how that changes and affects your content strategy, and maybe even snap a photo with your smartphone and share your empathy map with the class so people can see examples of what this might look like. I've seen some testing of the idea of calling, which might be a competition to Google Hangouts. So this is something to keep watching for Facebook, and the idea that you might be able to call a user if they've got their cell phone connected to Facebook right directly from Facebook. That's an interesting new test. That's it. Those are the case studies that you're exploring this week. I'm leaving you lots of time because I want to make sure you feel you're spending the most time on your overall strategy and the build of your page and not looking at me talking to you about all the different case studies, but certainly join us in the discussion thread. Carry out your empathy map. Get ready to answer all of your questions, and I can't wait to watch your presentations next week. This was Prezi, the tool that I use to walk you through this, an alternative presentation model if you're interested, and I'll see you all next week.